Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this event. I'm John Pethiker, the Physical Sciences Secretary and Vice President of the Royal Society, and it's my honour and privilege to welcome you here to this event. Probably by now have worked out that it is the Royal Society's 350th anniversary. It's probably rather difficult to avoid having noticed the stamps and many other events and a whole series of events which have been held over this year to celebrate that long anniversary. Seeing Further Book, the Festival of Science and Arts at the South Bank this summer, and events continue until the end of November, and this event is indeed part of the process. Of course, when the Society was founded 350 years ago, we didn't call science science, we called it natural philosophy. But in that intervening 350 years, the process of science has, of course, become reasonably well understood, the process of gathering experimental evidence and then drawing conclusions from it, rather than the other way round. So that's a process that the Society is closely involved in. Well, this evening's event, I should first of all also thank the sponsor for this evening's event, the Authors Licensing and Collecting Society. And it's my pleasure now to introduce your chair for this evening, Gabrielle Walker. Gabrielle Walker is writer, broadcaster and speaker specialising in energy and climate change. She presents flagship BBC radio programmes and has made many TV appearances. She's climbed trees in the Amazon rainforest, hooked lava out of a live volcano, dodged icebergs in Drake's Passage and spent several stints at the South Pole. Probably several other things. She has also a PhD in chemistry from Cambridge University and has been climate change editor at Nature and features editor of New Scientist and visiting professor at Princeton University. Her most recent book, co-authored with Sir David King, is The Hot Topic about climate change. She is now chief scientist of a low-carbon consulting company called Zintio. So it's my pleasure to welcome and hand over to Gabrielle Walker. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ross. Thank you and welcome to you all. And I think we have a very tasty evening ahead. I'm going to introduce you briefly to our two conversationalists here. And I'm going to give you, first of all, the official biographies, and then we'll see where we get on from there. I'll start with Brian. So Brian Hoskins.
He is a Fellow of the Royal Society, happily, and holds a Royal Society Research Professorship. And in January 2008, he was the first director of the Grantham Institute for Climate Change at Imperial College. He now shares his time between Imperial and Reading University. He's been Vice Chair of the Joint Scientific Committee for the World Climate Research Programme and President of the International Association of Meteorology. And, of course, he was in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which recently won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's had numerous UK roles. The one I was just trying to tell you about when you pointed out that you couldn't hear me was a 2000 report by the Royal Commission on Environmental Pollution. This is really significant because this was the first place that the target of a 60% cut in emissions for the UK, cutting carbon dioxide emissions, actually came out. And that target is now up at 80%. He's currently a member of the UK Committee on Climate Change, which is charged with helping us implement that massive and extraordinary cut. He's received a number of awards, including the top prize of the UK and US meteorological societies, honorary DSCs from all over the place, and you've probably gathered from the name Sir Brian Hoskins. He was knighted in 2007 for his services to the environment. So that's Brian. Round of applause, please, now. So that's the science part of it. I feel like I now should say in the blue corner, we have, of course, Margaret Atwood, who was born in Ottawa, Ontario, and is the daughter of a forest entomologist. It says here that she spent part of her early years in the bush of North Quebec, presumably staring at insects and other creatures around there, but hopefully we'll hear more about that in a while. Her first publication was actually a book of poetry, The Circle Game, in 1964, and immediately got the Governor-General's Literary Award for Poetry. But she's best known, of course, for her novels. It says here, and this is actually true as well, in which he creates strong, often enigmatic women characters and excels in telling open-ended stories. I can tell my own version of that, which is that I believe I've read every novel that Margaret's written, and I find repeatedly that she manages to articulate my fears, probably my fears more than my hopes, in ways that I haven't encountered before, but perhaps more of that in a while. Her first novel was The Edible Woman, about a woman who can't eat and feels that she's being eaten. And she's Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, has been presented with the Order of Ontario and the Norwegian Order of Literary Merit, that's a good one, and has been awarded 16 honorary degrees. Her most recent books are The Door, a collection of poetry, Payback, a collection of lectures about debt, and The Year of the Flood, which has some quite serious environmental implications, and I'm sure is going to come up later in the evening. And that was her latest novel. So I give you Margaret Atwood. So just to say a little bit about how we're going to go, first of all, we'll have a conversation up here between the blue corner and the red corner, and then after a little while, I'll throw the whole conversation open to you so that we can have some questions and answers. And we'll have a roving microphone. I think we were supposed to have 2 roving microphones, but you can't have mine, so we'll just have the one of them. So I wonder if I can start with you, Margaret. We heard that your father was an entomologist, but especially lately it seems that aspects of the environment are coming in increasingly into your books. So where did that come from and why?
Yes, it's kind of stupid. It's always been like that. In other words, my second novel had those concerns, but I grew up with this kind of dinner table conversation. My parents were early environmentalists. My father actually taught at the University of Toronto at one point. One of his students was Farley Mowat, who then went off to write about these kinds of things. So it's not a new story in our house. My parents, I would say, were on the you like the word cutting edge here. They were on the lunatic fringe edge of people who were talking about environmental collapse a long time before other people were, but mostly through the study of biology, through the collapses of species.
So that was sort of bred into you?
I don't know whether it's bred into me, but I heard a lot about it. And the books available in our house, of course, are arranged everywhere from detective stories, all of which I read, to books on entomology and biology, all of which I read. So what you have to picture is up in the woods there are no lending libraries. So you read all the books in the house, and then you read them all again. And then if you get bored, you read them again.
So let me come to you, Brian, now. Why did you start to care about the air, the atmosphere in the first place?
Well, I actually trained as a mathematician.
Are we hearing him?
Can you hear me?
Yes, okay.
Perhaps I'll move it this way, move my tie this way. I trained as a mathematician, and rather nice use of that mathematics was actually to understand how the atmosphere moves. And I did a PhD on the formation of fronts in the atmosphere as a mathematical problem. And this sort of led me into trying to look around at the atmosphere, see how it works. And this was the late 60s, and one couldn't go too far without seeing this problem of the climate and what we might be doing to it. And the question around then was, which way was it going to go? Were we going towards another ice age, or increasingly, perhaps, was it this carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas problem that was going to be uppermost? And I think I gave my first public lecture on the topic, I think in the late 70s, climate change, will we freeze or fry? And I came out with the fry bit, so that was to the Clean Air Society in Scarborough in the UK. But it's never really been the centre of my research. My research is understanding the atmosphere in all the ways it works in weather and climate, but it leads you naturally on to concern for what is happening to this whole system.
So when did you start to get scared?
Sad.
Scared.
I got scared, I think, well, around that time when I first publicly talked about it, because it seemed to be something we should be talking about in public if this was one of the possibilities of the way we were going. And I don't suppose it's... I suppose I've got increasingly scared over the last 40 years, I think, and certainly the last 20.
So, well, here's a question for both of you then, which is that if you were hearing about environmental collapse with your lunatic French cutting-edge parents all those years ago, and you were talking about this and actually getting the answer right 40 years ago, why has it taken us so long?
Nobody likes to hear that kind of bad news. It's discouraging. So if one person is saying we ought to do something about this and take steps and do this and that, and another person says, well, we don't know what to do, and another person says, actually, there's no problem, you're most inclined to believe the person who says there's no problem because that's more fun. And we are a species who would rather have more fun, and we would rather pick the low-hanging fruit and enjoy ourselves today. That's just who we are, and looking down the road 50 years or so doesn't appeal to us. It's not fun.
What do you think?
Yes, as a scientist, we're always talking about evidence and probabilities and how likely this is, and part of the difficulty is this communication problem of just how serious. The overall message can sometimes get lost in the details of our discussions of uncertainties of certain aspects of it. So as scientists, we have trouble communicating this, I think.
So do you think it takes people who write novels?
I do,
Not
actually,
mentioning
yes.
anyone in particular.
And I think this has become very apparent over the last few years, where as a scientist you've very much got to keep to the evidence and not become a campaigner. Once you do that, then you're no longer on your scientific basis. And if I'm giving a talk, and I try and sort of take one hat off. But as a citizen of the world, I want to say this. But then I think, it's great if the artist can actually take this and extrapolate from where we are and say, well, this is how it could be in the future, and write this in a form that is really going to grab people's attention.
But novels aren't true, and science is about truth, right?
Science isn't about truth, it's about evidence, I think. If you ask me, I don't believe in climate change either. I think the evidence is very strong. So,
because science isn't about belief?
No, it's not about belief. It's about the evidence we have. And the evidence that I see is that we're doing something very dangerous to this planet by emitting greenhouse gases. We're performing a very dangerous experiment. And there's a 5% chance, 1% chance maybe, that we don't have to worry too much, but I wouldn't like to bet on it.
Mm. Well, Margaret, I said before that you are spectacularly good at articulating my particular fears, and I presume that goes for many of the other people who are here as well. And it can be fears about bullying, or it can be fears about all sorts of different things, but particularly in your dystopias, the fears about environmental collapse. I'm thinking particularly about the year of the flood. When you're writing this stuff, you said that people we like to have fun. Don't you like to have fun?
I have lots of fun writing books like this. And I do point out to people, so far it is a book. So you can close the covers. It's still inside the book. And what you would wish to do is keep it inside the book. I think you formulated this evening as what can we do to save our planet. Well, our planet will probably be okay. It will still revolve around the sun. There will still be life forms on it. I don't think we'll be able to eliminate everything at the bottom of the sea or the microbes that live a mile down in rock. I think there will still be living creatures on it, no matter if we manage to eliminate ourselves. But we will go before an awful lot of other things do. We are quite a large life form. We need quite a lot of stuff to keep us going, such as air and water and food. And we are 6 billion on the planet now, and that's projected to be 9 billion in what is a blink of geological time. And we're already past the carrying capacity. So the question is not the carrying capacity for us. For us. Other smaller things will doubtless outlive us and have quite a fine time, although cockroaches will apparently do worse.
But some creatures will do better. I must admit, I find it terribly comforting in a way, and maybe this says something sick about me, but the idea that most of Earth history, the Earth has actually been populated by green slime. That was all there was for most of Earth history. In fact, all these kind of animals and interesting creatures only came relatively recently in the history of the Earth. And the chances are that if we do actually manage to wipe out the creatures that we're trying hard to, we'll probably go back to green slime. And I don't know why I find that comforting, but somehow I do.
It was the green slime that produced the oxygen that we breathe.
Exactly.
So we should probably be quite grateful to the green slime, and maybe it will do its job again.
Bring about something better. But before we doom the human race to extinction, let me pull you back just to something you were saying that I thought was interesting. You said that you want to keep it in the book. Do you feel like you're writing to get it out of your head and into a book safely, in a book where you can close it off?
No, I don't think that's the way it happens. I say it's in a book to my rather disturbed audiences sometime. I do kick off by saying it is the most joke-filled, fun-packed adventure story you will ever read about the almost entire elimination of the human race, just to make them feel that there's some cheer involved in this. But the thing about writing books is if there isn't a story that people want to follow, they don't read the book. And the thing about math and charts and graphs is they're factually true, though they may be. They're not very gripping for most people. What most people are interested in is stories about individual other people. They're not that keen on statistics. They're not that keen on charts and graphs. What they want to know is the story of pick a name. They want to know about that person and what happens to that person, and they want that person to be a person that interests them and that they like.
Do you think there are stories in science?
I think I prefer Margaret's stories to the ones in science, usually. You can follow a story if you want, but it isn't quite the same human dimension as a novel to take you through.
Science is a tool.
Yeah.
It's a tool, and what you use the tool for is going to depend on the human beings using it.
But
So you can say
books-
science drives the world, but it actually isn't science driving the world. It's the people using science, and that means us.
But I write books about science, and I find that most of the stories in them are stories about the people who do the science and why they do it and what they find out, and that's what makes it interesting too. But I do think there are fantastic stories in science, and climate change itself is a fantastic story. It's extraordinary how everything fits together and how it conspires to make these changes. But
It's a story about the science itself, yes, and the people involved.
But they aren't going to be interested in it until it impacts them. Do you see what I mean?
yeah.
Or until it impacts the story of somebody that interests them.
And you started to care about.
Or that you can actually go and physically see, and you can actually go and physically see where the glaciers were last year and where they are this year. And you can talk to people who live in the Arctic, and they will tell you that they are seeing life forms up there that they have never seen before in their lives. So their lives are the first lives that are being really impacted, apart from those who have been caught in extreme weather conditions such as floods. The floods in Pakistan, there were a number of flooding episodes in the United States, or as the climate change folks put it, what goes up with increased evaporation has to come down, and you're going to get more tumultuous, precipitous and extreme weather events, and that's when it hits.
And that's the human story. So would you say that the climate change story is in fact a story of humans?
Oh, I think so. As we said before, then most of the planet will survive what we do to the climate, although some species won't. But it's a human story in terms of what's being done to the planet, and it's the impact on humans that is actually what we should be particularly concerned at this moment. I think we have to be concerned with the rest of nature, but if the speed we're doing it to ourselves, I think that is the major concern at the moment.
Some of my best friends are humans.
Are they? Okay.
But not all.
What are the others?
Yes, well, in
But two very nice cats.
Margaret's book, some of the humans don't come out too well, I don't think.
Well, I was about to say that because if we're looking at climate change as a human story, first of all, you have the way that humans are affected, but of course you also have the way that humans have caused this in the first place. And if I'm thinking about your books, scientists and technologists really don't come out very well. They tend to be the villains. And the heroes tend to be people
I wouldn't say that. I think there are some pretty good applications that they have thought up. Wouldn't you like to be able to grow your own hair on a sheep and then replace it at need on your head?
I'm not sure I would, actually.
I think there's a commercial future in that.
But I mean, you have a very memorable description, I think, in the year of the flood about these chickens. I can't remember what they're called.
Oh, chicky knobs.
Knobs.
We're already there.
Yeah.
We're already growing artificial meat.
So this is basically growing artificial chicken breasts, and the person who's looking at it says, I don't really like the
Yeah,
look of it.
okay, well, we shouldn't even call it artificial. It's real meat that has never actually been on an animal or on a conscious animal in the case of chicky knobs. So, and I've seen, and of course, these articles are coming out all the time now, and meat in vats has been proposed as one of the answers to one of our problems, which is the amount of methane that cows produce. So grow the cow meat not on a cow, on a non-cow matrix or rack to stretch it, to give it a bit of tone so it's not just sort of pink goo. And you do away with the methane and also with the objections that animal rights people have to cows being killed.
But it doesn't sound up. I mean, okay, hands up who would eat meat grown. So it was exactly like cow's meat, except it was grown as pink goo on a rack. Oh, quite a lot.
Sure, you see. A couple of years ago, they would have said no. And it does really depend on how hungry you are. I'm
sure.
There
have been times late night when some of those burgers can look really good. So, well, I guess I'd like to ask you, I mean, there are some interesting inventions in your book, certainly, but the particular nature of the environmental destruction and the genetic modification and the rampant diseases have actually come from people's brains and have been created by scientists and technologists. So do you feel like there's more of a dark side than a light side to science?
Science doesn't have a dark side or a light side. It's just a tool. The dark side and the light side are in people, not in science. Science is a methodology, and applied science is technology, and it makes tools. Now, the thing about the tools we make, of course, we never make, except for funny contests. I think there's one in Japan to make a totally useless object. But we never make things that are not utterings of our very, very ancient desires and fears. And you can tell what's on that list just by reading mythology and fairy tales. We always want the 7-league boots, we want to fly through the air, we want the endless supply of food on the table that will clean itself up afterwards and we don't have to do it.
I want that especially.
Yes, especially. We want the purse that will always be full of gold. I think that's called the stock market. So it doesn't always work. And we want all of these things. We want the ability to see long distances. We would like to be invisible so we can spy on people and they won't know we're there. And we particularly want an endless supply of sexually attractive partners, but we also want our own partners to be faithful to us. This is a math problem. So we want all of these things, and we go about making all of these things. We want to live forever. We want immortal youth, blah, blah. I mean, it's in all the myths. So we go about making these things, and then there are side effects. For instance, we wanted to go faster. We invented the automobile. Now there are side effects. We didn't like our caves because they were cold sometimes and water dripped out of them. So we had to build dwellings, and then we had to heat them and cool them. And that's what we want. We want those things. But there are side effects.
So do you think, rather than there being a dark side and a light side to science, technology is a way of our trying to realize our innermost dreams?
I think, thinking about the environmental problem in particular, science and technology give a way to find a way of living sustainably on this planet. It's a question of whether humans can deal with this and actually take the science and technology and do things with it, and if those side problems occur, say, hey, this line is something we should stop. But actually, the solutions are there. We know already for energy, we could produce almost zero carbon energy by 20 years' time.
What are you thinking of?
We can do that in a number of ways with no single solution, with wind, with solar, with capturing the carbon and putting it underground from fossil stations, and probably with nuclear as well. So there's all sorts of things we can do. Science and technology gives us the possibilities, but unless humans display better characteristics than they've done in the past, probably those solutions will be suppressed compared with the side effects.
And Why is it, given that we're a pretty clever species, we've managed to get ourselves to 6 billion people, we haven't just come up with dwellings, we've also come up with poetry and literature and music and great science. Why are we not seeing this and acting on it?
I'll let Margaret answer that first.
I think a number of people are, but are they is there a critical mass? I don't think you are going to get politicians anytime soon to sign up for anything or line up for anything, because it's the skinny dipping problem. Now, nobody wants to be the first to throw off all their clothes and jump into an ice cold lake. They will do it if the others will, but the others don't want to be first either. And nobody wants the voter reaction that would come from the extra expense it would probably involve at first. So I think you will see these things on the local, on the municipal and possibly even county level. There's a number of transition towns already in the UK. Individual communities are doing these things, but to get the whole country, to get all of the countries to do it at once, that's going to be very, very difficult.
Yes, I mean, I sidestepped the problem to start with, but I think it is a real challenge to our species whether we can show the selflessness required. We're used to maybe doing something for our own children or our own family or perhaps our own village, but here we're really being asked, the challenge is, can we do something for the species, perhaps in another continent, in the next generation? And that's a big challenge to our selfish species about whether we can do that.
I'm not even sure that it's selfishness as such, and in fact we're turning out to be, says science, somewhat less selfish than we were told we were 20 years ago. 20 years ago it was all selfishness. Now there's a lot coming out about chimpanzees helping other old arthritic chimpanzees that will never be able to return the favor. We turn out to be more sharing and caring than we were told we were a couple of decades ago.
It's still a challenge to move that from the small group to the huge planet.
It's a challenge to move it from the small group to other people you've never met.
That's right.
But, I don't know, because, I mean, if you think about the level of cooperation that's required for all of us to be in this room now, and so, we've all decided to come here. When we got here, there were already the chairs and there was already a roof and there were already lights, and the lights are being powered by someone else who's working in a power station and someone else who's paying a bill. I presume they're paying a bill so that the lights don't all go out halfway through. And then we have our microphones and we have the energy that's powering those. And someone somewhere is doing all of that so that we can have this evening. So there's a massive level of cooperation just going on now. And then there's international cooperation.
That's called jobs that people get paid for, which is a little different from just donating your time.
But it's still cooperation.
Of a kind. Yeah. I think if you said, well, we want you to do all this, but we're not going to give you any money, and then you won't be able to buy any food, and then you're going to get kicked out of your flat.
But is that the only answer to climate change? We have to tell people they have to change and they're not going to get any money?
Well, that wasn't what I was proposing.
So I don't think that's going to
I think if you put in a dollar incentive, you'd probably get a pound incentive, you'd probably get quite a lot better results with it. And where it does work is if you can show, for instance, a company or an industry that they will save a lot of money by insulating themselves and using better technologies, or that you can put in a system that's going to pay back for itself in, say, 3 or 4 years, and then they will make money on top of that. If they believe you, they will probably do it, supposing they've got the capital, supposing they've got the ready cash to pay for it. But it is not just a problem of human nature and how good or bad we are. It's also an economic problem.
Certainly, using economic measures, you can overcome this selfishness in a big way. And in terms of the world, we clearly, as developed countries, have a responsibility to help those countries that are developing get through to the level of life that we have, but without the carbon. And that will require us giving them many things.
Well, what are we going to do about our own carbon meanwhile?
Well, in the UK, we have a target of 80% reduction by 2050.
And how likely
and our government is sure that we're going to reach that.
They are?
Is the Climate Change Committee sure that we're going to reach it?
We said we need a step change in action.
Yeah.
And so
That's a big step, right?
No, not that big. The recession helped, actually, but
but
in the wrong way. No, I mean, the policies that are there can get us on the right direction. In this country, we can actually see that with today's technology, we could get there. So we don't need a magic wand, we just need the will to do it. And we have it enshrined in law that we're going to do it.
That's great for you. What are you going to do about North America?
We're going to show North America that when we do this, that our economy thrives, actually with the new industries that will be required, who should be able to invest because they know that's the way we're going. And suddenly all those big companies in the US that see they're missing out might want to join in, and maybe the scene would suddenly change.
What shall you do about the oil industry?
I think they need a bottom drawer, which I'm sure they have with the alternatives. And they would, if they see China and maybe the UK leading some of these technologies, they won't be very happy about that for long.
They do have a bottom drawer.
What is the bottom drawer?
The bottom drawer has, if you look at people like Shell and BP, a few years ago they were really positioning themselves as beyond petroleum and all that sort of stuff and all these alternative energies. They discreetly stepped away from many of those, saying that they're not economic. But they're ready to go. They're ready to go back into solar, into wind. They have carbon capture and storage plans in their bottom drawers. But they're not getting them out yet for the reasons that you've already said. They don't want to be the first to jump into the icy cold pool.
What are you going to do about coal burning?
Well, that's the carbon capture sequestration. If coal has to be burnt, then we have to develop those technologies and hope they work. There's no reason that people can see why they should not work, but however, it's never been done at scale. So, but for many countries in the world, that is going to be what they'll require to do, and so we have to hope that that will work. And in the developed countries, again, we should make sure that we show how that does work and then give it essentially to the countries that require it.
So there's no plan to bring back wool?
Wool?
Yes, wool.
If everybody just wears lots of wool in the winter.
I think you'll find many people in this country are wearing lots of wool now.
I've got my wool out already. The problem with coal, of course, is that an awful lot of it isn't used to heat people so much as to make light and to make electricity that's used for other forms of transport as well. So it's about making electricity. And India and China have got an awful lot of coal, and I don't want to be the one who goes over there and tries to say to them, you know what, we created this problem on the back of the Industrial Revolution. We burnt a lot of coal and we have lovely lifestyles, and you have 700 million people living on $1 a day, and we don't care. Stop burning your coal. It's not going to work.
It's difficult, but let's talk about water.
And water could be the big problem associated with the growing population and with changing climate.
The drying up.
Yep.
Yeah, well, some places that are dry now might become drier, and other places, and even those places, the rain they get may come down in faster rate. So some will receive more, and no doubt there will be parts of the world where if they can change their lifestyle, maybe life would become easier. We can't say everywhere would become more difficult, but it would be different, and that's what we find. Over the last 30 years or so, we've assumed life has to be like this, and we have to live in this manner. But it would mean an evolving life, but water availability is a real problem, there's no doubt.
President Putin, actually, God bless him, he said, I wouldn't mind a bit of climate change. He said it would mean that we get bigger wheat yields and we wouldn't have to buy so many fur coats.
Yes.
You've got to love him, haven't you? And he was sort of right, actually, for 1 or 2 degrees. It would actually get better in parts of Russia, but when you go higher than about 2 degrees, then you start to get reductions in food yields, but you also start to get melting of an awful lot of permafrost in Siberia. And then that gets very unpleasant. Before I'm going to go short.
Could you just expand on how unpleasant that gets?
Yeah, well, that's a Canadian issue too, of course, because if you're asking what keeps me awake at night, and the thing that frightens me most about this whole game, is what happens when the permafrost melts. Because everything else, we sort of say, okay, it might get a bit hotter and it might get a bit hotter, and we can maybe try and balance it and manage it. And then people talk about tipping points. I don't really approve of that, because there isn't ever any one point where everything suddenly changes. But there's an awful lot of permafrost, permanently frozen soil, up in Canada and in northern Siberia, and it's got a lot of carbon in it. It's got all those twigs and roots and leaves and things that have been buried down there and haven't rotted because it's frozen. And what we're effectively doing is turning the freezer off. And when you turn the freezer off, the stuff inside it rots. And when it rots, it gives out methane, and methane is a tremendously powerful greenhouse gas. And if that process really gets going, give out some methane, warm things up, so melt a bit more, so give out a bit more, so warm things up more, and you keep on like that, then all bets will be off. There'll be nothing more we can do, and we might as well dance around the bonfire. So that's the one that particularly worries me. Which brings me to dystopia. And before I do throw things open to the audience, there's something I wanted to read out from Year of the Flood. So if you bear with me for a moment, I have it in here. There's a quite... I find these guys really funny. So for those of you who haven't read this marvellous book, some of the characters in it are called gardeners, and they're sort of the antidote to all the sort of hyper-technology that's caused all the problems in the first place. And they're really sweet. They're vegetarian, and they grow flowers, and they're all very nice to each other. And at the end of every chapter, they have a meeting where they sing a hymn. And I'd love to know at some point how you wrote all these marvellous hymns. But the gardeners, what their theory is, they have this idea that there's a whole bunch of them, all the men are called Adam and the women are called Eve, and they're Adam 1, 2, 3, and so on. But they have this conviction that a new flood is coming to wipe out creation. It's what we've been talking about. Something is coming that's going to wipe out all of humankind. And they're utterly convinced it's coming, and they have some theories about why. And here's a little quote. So this is Adam 1. He's giving his chapterly lesson, and he says, "At the first creation, all was rejoicing. But the second event was qualified. God was no longer so well pleased. He knew that something had gone very wrong with his last experiment, man, but that it was too late for him to fix it." Quote, "I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake, for the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite every living thing as I have done, say the human words of God in Genesis 8:21. Yes, my friends, any further cursing of the ground would be done not by God, but by man himself. Consider the southern shores of the Mediterranean, once fruitful farmland, now a desert. Consider the ruinations wrought in the Amazon River basin. Consider the wholesale slaughter of ecosystems, each one a living reflection of God's infinite care for detail." So this is what Adam 1 is saying to his lovely sweet gardeners. He's saying, inevitably, another flood is coming, and it's been caused by the devastation that we've wrought on the planet. So, with that fine thought in mind, I would like to throw this open now. Does anyone have any questions or comments? And a roving microphone. Oh gosh, we stunned you all. Okay, there's a question at the back there. Can we get a microphone over there?
Thank you. Hello.
Okay.
I was just wondering, Margaret, you said that science was a tool, but I was just wondering, could you also say that although it's a tool, kind of in society, it's also a concept? And I was just wondering how you see your role as an author in kind of presenting that concept to people who aren't scientists, and like, do you see that as important in this kind of problem-shared idea and in tackling climate change?
So the question was, how do I see my role as an author in preventing climate change? And probably about the same as you see your role as a citizen. People are always shoving stuff off onto authors, that it should be the author's role to do this and that and this and that. But it's no more my role than it is yours. Usually people say the author's role should be this and that, so that they themselves don't actually have to do it. So sure, we can write books and people can read them, but the actual detailed work of cutting down your carbon emissions and so on and so forth, that's you as a voter. And it's also you as a consumer and person who is alive on this planet.
But I think you're helping with your glimpse of what the future could be by...
Oh, sometimes I just put people off, let's face it. So do you. And sometimes you just don't want to hear any of this, especially before breakfast.
Yeah.
It's just too much.
I think one of the reasons that one of the reasons that we're in this mess is that we've all found it very easy to say that it's somebody else's fault. And that's one of the biggest reasons, I think, why we've been talking about this for 40 years and still haven't done anything about it. It's
I
always
actually
someone else.
don't think it's anybody's fault, in that I don't think anybody did it on purpose. I don't think anybody said, oh, good, let's heat up the planet so that all of this horrible stuff will happen. I think it's a byproduct of other things that people did that they really thought were quite good. And they were quite good in many ways.
That's actually very fair. I should say other people's responsibility. People have often said to me, if it's as bad as you say, someone would be doing something. And the question is, who?
Well, lots of people, again, are doing things. If you check out the tech pages and science magazines, not a one passes without some new invention, whether commercializable or not. But people are thinking very hard about these problems. There's a number of solar-driven desalination plans, for instance, and that's certainly going to be necessary. But who will bring it to market? The unfortunate part always is that often the places where these things are most needed are also the places without any money.
Yeah. You were commenting about that, about the importance of getting technological innovation from the rich countries into the poorer ones.
Yes, I mean, that has to be part of any solution, if we find one, is to help countries not go through the development phase that we've been through. And that will mean they're aspiring to the quality of life, and why shouldn't they? And so the only solution to that must be to actually ease them into a level we managed to reach here, so they leapfrog over what we've done.
So take a low-carbon path to the same results?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, more questions, comments?
So I'm just curious, if we were to get into the desirable situation where every registered voter in developed countries agreed that we really should do something, and this was a major problem, and yet the science was still uncertain as to exactly where various tipping points might occur or what the feedbacks would be. So how would we frame a discussion? How do you think we would frame a discussion and tell a story in terms of how precautionary should we be when we know we don't know? I mean, how do we go about deciding when the impacts could be huge, but we're really not sure where they would onset? How would we decide how much resources to invest in that direction when we know we don't know?
Brian?
And Lenny knows there's no answer to that. But clearly, this is why we have politicians in the end, is to make decisions on the basis in regions of uncertainty. I can say and I wave my hands of whether there might be a 1% chance we don't have a big problem, a 5% chance. As someone who has insurance on my house for a very small percentage chance that it might actually burn down, I think a 95% chance our planet might be in trouble, our only planet, is good enough for me, and I think it would be for most voters and for most governments. And so I don't need to dot every I and cross every T, if I can say that.
But I think the problem is that people don't actually know what to do. Isn't that it? If you had a solution that you were absolutely certain about, that would make things a lot easier. But there is not one solution because there is not just one problem.
No, you're meaning it isn't just global warming, there's all the other things we're doing to the planet.
It's not just global warming, there's all of the other things too, but also even with the global warming, there isn't just one solution.
Oh, no, there isn't, absolutely. But as I said, with today's technology, we know what we could do. And most of the thinking one does in terms of one problem, you actually start to think holistically about the system as well, and you start to doing everything. You're using less resource, and you're creating less waste. And both of those have got to be good. That's what we've got to do to live on this planet. And we know most of the sorts of things to do now. Now we're going to find all sorts of better ways to do it in future. But as I say, it isn't an insoluble problem in terms of science and technology. It may be in terms of humans.
Okay, next question.
I was just wondering what your opinion is of carbon abatement technologies such as carbon capture and storage, and wondering, a lot of people see them as a temporary solution rather than a cure, and maybe funding might be better elsewhere. I'm wondering what your opinion is.
So is something like carbon capture and storage, is it essential, or should we be spending money on something else given that it's not a long-term solution?
I think we're in the game where we need the short-term solutions as well as the longer ones. And we can't afford to tie our hands behind our back and say, well, we won't take that one. We've actually got to grab every single one we know about and try and run with it. And so it's a big enough technology, and as we've discussed, there are many countries around the world that might depend on that coal. So even if, in the end, we find we could do without it, the world needs that technology if it can be developed. So, I mean, I agree it would be better if we didn't burn the fossil fuel at all, but we have to be realistic that in the shorter term, we're going to. And so if we can actually stop that carbon dioxide getting into the atmosphere, great.
Margaret, some of the technologies that we've talked about that are low carbon are things like solar and wind, and I have a feeling that your gentle gardeners would approve of those. But other ones like carbon capture, where you have to you burn the dirty stuff, or nuclear, I think your gardeners wouldn't approve of quite so well. What do you think about those?
What do I think the gardeners would think?
No,
or
what do you think?
Well, you can't really, I mean, every single one of them has got a downside of some kind. The one I'm quite keen on at the moment is a new solar technology that's made of little tubes rather than panels. Because it's made of little tubes, it can get the light from any angle, and you can wrap it around objects. So you could, in fact, wrap the south and west and east sides of your house with it, and then you would be getting, it's like a fabric. Uh-huh. So I'm quite keen on that one. I'm not...
You heard it here first.
Yeah, the problem with the wind and the solar is that when, I broke it to you first here, when the wind stops blowing, you don't
you don't have any electricity.
So
we have thought of that.
Yes. The Chinese are going big time into batteries.
Yeah.
So probably a bigger and better battery might help out with the solar and the wind thing. There is a lot of problems with industrial wind turbines. I'm much more interested in solar myself. The gardeners do have a run for your light treadmill, which combines exercise with electricity generation, and I think that would be. I think somebody is actually doing this. It's very hard to think these things up and then not have somebody doing them.
Be careful what you write.
Exactly. There are some good ones and some bad ones. They're now making, for instance, well, you don't want to hear all of this.
I don't know if you want to hear something that's a bad one. So
no, it's actually a good one, but it's interesting. They're making artificial veins out of silkworm silk.
Veins.
Veins. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. I actually
yes,
have
veins and valves and things like that, because the body doesn't reject them, and they're also growing an organ for you. An organ for you on a little matrix out of your very own cells.
If it had been out of a slug, would you have been so keen or what?
Well, they probably did it with slugs first just to test it out. But if you want to see a really weird website, go to something called Victimless Leather, in which they're growing inside a little round ball, like the kind you see in Frankenstein movies. They're growing a tiny little leather coat on a little coat-shaped matrix with animal cells. So it's victimless leather because this leather has never actually been part of an animal.
Run, don't walk to look this up, but don't go yet. Okay, so in the middle there, just over there? Yeah? Oh, sorry, I meant this gentleman first.
One problem which I want to talk about two problems. The first one I want to mention is that there appears to be quite a well-organised core of climate change denialists, and they are supported by a very large number of probably unpaid acolytes who are endlessly blasting the net with various denialist comments, almost flooding the Guardian environment. And I'd like some comments on what to do about these, or whether we should take sterner measures against denialism, or perhaps write a computer program that detects denialist propaganda and eliminates it.
I like that.
The next thing I suggest is that as a slight critique of leading figures in science engineering, for probably present company not accepted, they sound somewhat like Bob the Builder approach, we can do it, when they should actually be explaining to decision makers who are probably trying to make decisions they're not qualified to make of the grim implications of the laws of thermodynamics, and that these laws are not breakable. And the idea that there's some technological breakthrough down the line which will make CCS use virtually no energy is simply rubbish, because you can work it out on a piece of paper that it takes so much energy to do this as an absolute minimum.
Okay, so we've got two excellent questions. First of all, what do we think and/or what can we do about climate change deniers? I quite like the idea of that computer program, although I do confess that it's like many of Margaret's inventions. As soon as you come up with it, a computer program like that could be used for all sorts of very nefarious purposes. And I wouldn't like to be the person who has to decide what's good and what's bad on the net. So that's what do we do about climate change deniers? What do we feel about them? And also the second one, what about the sort of the opposite, but maybe just as damaging, the Pollyanna technologists who say we can fix it, we don't need to worry?
I guess we've done a pretty bad job in terms of keeping the climate discussion on what I would think was a reasonably rational level. But actually, what I most dislike about what's happened in the last few years is it's almost impossible for me to talk in public about being a sceptical scientist. And I have often over the years said I don't believe that in the models, and this is not the case. And because it's become so polarized, it's become very difficult to have that proper scientific discussion of what we really know and what we're uncertain about. So we clearly haven't done our job very well in terms of communicating our confidence and how we see the science.
But to be a scientist is to be a skeptic. You're supposed to challenge it all the time, right?
Absolutely. And of course, we always get this thing about, the Earth being round. That was a minority opinion to start with, and that's sort of always trotted out as being the idea that the single person or the small group's always got to be right. We clearly haven't done a very good job. As scientists can't spend every day, as the suggestion with that computer code, we can't spend every day on the blog dealing with the latest version of what's been put up there. And yet somehow we've got to keep the discussion going at a right level. I don't know the answer.
I heard one person say, I think this was on a radio program, just because 99% of the climate scientists in the world disagree with you doesn't mean you're right. What do you think, Margaret?
I pick up people on planes. And I picked up a guy who was sitting next to me. I shouldn't say I picked them up. I talked to them. And he was in the business of measuring waves, measuring the heights of waves. And he said, actually, you don't have to measure the temperature of the air or any of these other things. All you have to do is measure the height of the waves, because when it's warmer, the wind blows more and the waves get higher. And he then said, I can't remember the exact thing, but over the past 30 years, the average height of the waves in the ocean has doubled. He said, that's all you really need to measure. So maybe they should go out and measure some waves. I would just suggest that they go measure some waves in the ocean. They're very physical. You can see them. It's not like air temperature or any of those things.
That's where I would start to be a bit skeptical, actually.
You would be starting to be skeptical.
Yes, they might get greater in some places, but less in others. And,
but overall, they're more. Says this guy whose business it is. And he is a scientist. Or if you want to, go up to the Arctic. It's very clear.
Yep, okay. I'd agree there. Yes.
Yeah, you go up, you see where the glacier was last year, and you see where it is this year, and you see where it was 10 years ago. And you just see that they have really quite radically moved back.
I have my climate change talk with all these, it's not just temperature, it's the glaciers, it's the Arctic ice, it's this, and this, yeah.
It's extraordinary to me, because I've been a scientist for most of my life, and I haven't before encountered an area of research where everything points so completely in one direction. It's actually extraordinary. But I quite like the idea that if you're talking to a skeptic and they don't believe you, tell them to go out into the middle of the ocean and measure the waves. That's one way to get rid of them in the conversation.
Well, I wouldn't be trying to get rid of them. I'd be trying to give them something practical and fun to do.
Something to focus their attention.
Do some boating, be in the ocean. It's healthy. You breathe the sea air. Well, there still is some. But you could also just change topic and say, well, okay, let's leave climate change for a while and talk about fish. Fish. The fact that we have gotten rid of 90% of the world's fish over the past 50 years. So do they disagree with that part?
Even if it weren't for climate change, there'd still be a lot to worry about.
Yeah. There's lots of other things. If you want to deny climate change, maybe you could do something about the fish.
And I like that as an answer too. So the gentleman who I just interrupted, go on.
From your fellow countryman, Marshall McLuhan, who said, we shape our tools and in their turn they shape us. I'm not sure that technology is going to solve our problems, quite honestly. I think the car's an immense problem. I can get by without a car. And meat eating is an immense problem on this planet. If everybody changed their eating habits, it would make a big impact, I would think. And I tend to agree with John Zazan in America that...
what's your question for us?
Well, modern civilization is pathological. We're a flawed species on a grand scale. I don't think we're just tinkering around with things. We want to get back to what we've left.
Just what's your question?
Well, do you think that we're a flawed species on a grand scale?
Okay.
Absolutely.
Is it pathological? Are we flawed?
Well, you're absolutely right. The only problem is that there are now so many of us that we can't all go back to hunting and gathering. We can't. It's just not going to happen. We can't even all go back to agriculture, although you might be able to grow some tomatoes in a pot on your balcony. But we have gone beyond the point where we can go back to a simpler lifestyle for everybody. It's just not going to happen. So I'm afraid we have to try to fool around with what we're stuck with. And those results are doubtless going to be mixed. Why hasn't anybody talked about population growth? Is that because it's a very naughty subject and it's going to get you in trouble with churches who for some reason think it's a great thing to have all of these starving babies all over the place?
Yeah, just to go to the science and technology, it won't do it on its own, but if it's there, if we use it properly, I think, to live on this planet. But as you say, with going up to 9 billion on this planet, certainly we're making all the problems a lot more difficult.
There's not enough fish and there isn't enough water. And 3 days without water, and that's it for you. You can get by longer without the fish. But
feeling thirsty now.
But the water.
There isn't room for 9 billion people living like Californians.
No.
And so we have to find another way of doing it. Yeah. And it would be easier if we were only 1 billion, that's clear.
Well, you know what Stephen Spender said.
Is that a question for me?
He said that he became a socialist because he thought that meant that everybody else would be able to live like him. And then he found out that it meant that he would have to live like everybody else. So he quit. So we're very fond of telling other people how to live, but we're not very fond of changing the way we live. Because we like it. We're used to it. It's what we're used to. And this is really the problem, is it not?
Is it gentleman here?
The problems that everyone's wrestling with, I think, are the problems that we feel that we have to do or can do. But as a domesticated animal, we need a farmer, and the farmer is the roadmap. And all of our politics and our economic theory are 19th century. The last great political idea was Marx. The 20th century went by without any attempt to address post-industrial revolution. Everything is based upon growth. Everything will collapse if we don't maintain that growth. And that the battle that we have to try and do something about not only climate change, but the whole impact that we're having on the earth, both in population and the way we behave, and that there's no theory, there's no way that our societies can work without growth. And without that growth, we just saw recently what happened to the economy. Everything collapses. There's a fellow called John Livingston, a Canadian who was a contemporary of McLuhan, wrote a book called The Fallacy of Wildlife Conservation. And he made two very interesting points. One of them, he believed that there were no engineering solutions to cultural problems, right? And what we're trying to do is to find engineering solutions to what is essentially a cultural problem. It's us and the way we're living, and the fact that we're out of control, and we've lost our relationship with the earth.
Oh. So there wasn't actually a question in there, but there was a comment that I can turn into a question, which is, can you have sustainable growth? Or do we need a new kind of economic model? And if we do, where are we going to get it from? You have half a page and you have 10 minutes to solve the problems of the world.
I think you've just got the right pair to deal with this. Yeah. We're well known for our economic expertise. But it's very clear, if you're going to, can you have growth? Well, growth in something else other than how we measure it now. And that's clear, and we have to find a way of doing that.
So like growth in well-being, for example?
Absolutely. So a different measure. And I think even though China is known for, depending on its 10% per annum growth rate, they're thinking about different ways of measuring the growth of well-being in some ways. And we should really be trying to develop that.
Sounds good to me.
You're not going to disagree. Okay, another question or comment.
I wondered what you thought about the new phenomena of market environmentalism, the creation of tradable property rights in things like biodiversity, endangered species, and water, and how that is going to affect this whole scenario.
Who is trading what, and what are they trading it for?
Well, they're placing a value. It's been going on in the U.S. but for quite a while, but the big markets have started in Australia. In 2008, they started building these, having biobanks. So, the first one was in Malaysia. There was a state in Malaysia that decided to put aside 34,000 hectares of land, of forest land, I guess it was tropical forest land, and sell credits to palm oil farmers. It's almost like a corporate responsibility sort of thing. They've created a registry where they register these interests, and some money is used to help maintain these forests, but the rest is sold on a market. So they're placing a value on these markets, and they're doing the same with water. And water is actually physically being transferred. So if you live somewhere with lots and lots of water, but you're not farming, and some other area needs it, we now have the technology to transfer it in huge packages to send it from one part of the world to another that needs it. And they have these water rights that in Australia are now being traded.
So Brian, this sounds. There are various aspects of the carbon offsetting, and there's yes, also.
It's an extension of all of that, and it started off in the U.S. with mitigation rights. Yeah. In the 60s and 70s on a very small scale, but now there are private equity groups setting up these.
But in fact, the whole carbon trading schemes are based on a similar principle.
Yes, yes.
So what do we think about carbon trading and environmental trading?
I think I'm prepared to treat this as an experiment where we should see, having done some years of one of these or a number of these, what has been the net result, because one can see that. Maybe by involving the financial system and the economics and people doing things, maybe there is going to be a net benefit to the thing we're really after. But I don't think we should allow the smokescreen of all this activity to stop us really looking at the results of the experiments we've already had. Instead, have things actually been improved for the planet by that experiment? So we should view it as a scientific experiment.
And monitor it very carefully.
Absolutely.
I should also say that when I talked about the oil companies, for example, having things in their bottom drawers, there's also lots of other big companies that I think are taking this whole area very seriously, much more seriously than many of our politicians are. And business leaders who want to make money out of it, but who also, consider themselves to be human beings who have a responsibility on the planet. And I've discovered to my surprise that not all business leaders are bad. And in this context, having a price on carbon is one of the economic incentives that they all say that they need to be able to bring everybody along with them. And we talked earlier about how if you tell people they have to change but you don't give them any money or jobs, they're not going to do it. So, it might seem as though trading in something which is natural and pure ought not to happen, but there ain't nothing natural or pure on the planet, and nor is there ever likely to be. Another question or comment? Let's see, let's have over here.
In relevance to what you said earlier, and the first person who asked a question, that science is a tool, it sounds like it's the human motivation that really causes all the problems. Who would you, I guess, name or how would you solve that problem? Because, for example, education is responsible, our system of education in every country is responsible to increase our knowledge of facts, and actually to measures us as quite a selfish, we each individually compete against each other. So the kind of morality and essence of who we are and how we impact the world has been left to religion. There's nobody really kind of picking up the tab saying, who's going to teach the young people in terms of, how we, the choices we make, what the impact they make onto, for ourselves and to other species and on our planet, etc. It's a big question, but...
No, it's an excellent question too. It's in a way, who's going to do the teaching? And especially, everybody said that your gardeners were a religious order as much as a...
Absolutely, and this is probably the way it's going to go. In fact, it's already going that way in certain parts of the world. For instance, you may not be aware of it, but we now have the Green Bible. It has tasteful linen covers. It has virtuous paper. It has introduction by Archbishop Tutu.
Is it green?
And is the Bible
Is it actually green?
The green parts are printed in green. Some of them are kind of puzzling, but others are about animals. So all the parts about animals and plants are in green, and then there's some puzzling parts that are also in green, which I didn't quite understand. But it is the Green Bible, and there is a schism in U.S.-style fundamentalism with some of the people thinking, where the end times are near, we're all going to be burnt to a crisp except them, because they're going to be raptured up, and then God will make a new one. So you can trash this one as much as you like, because it doesn't matter. That's some of them. The other ones have taken the stewardship view, which is that we ought to be taking care of this planet, and those are the ones who produced the Green Bible. The Quran takes the view that animals are, as it were, separate but equal, that they have their own societies and that they should be respected. And if a religion like that got back to its roots, which are right there in the Quran, then you would see probably quite a lot of progress in this area. Similarly, the Buddhists, certain religions in India, the Jains, for instance, the Christians did have this. All you have to do is go into an old cathedral and look at what's on the walls. There's plants, there's animals, there's all of these things. Creation was seen as a whole. Man was part of it. You were within the setting. Up on the ceiling, there's always the stars and planets and what have you. So it used to be a much more holistic view, and it was unfortunately the Enlightenment and the view of nature as mechanical that separated us from those roots. But now we're coming back to the view that animals have a lot more intelligence than we thought, and that we're a lot closer to them than we thought. And it's also beginning to penetrate our heads that you can't actually breathe without oxygen and things like that, which are produced by other living beings, and you can't exist without food, and so on and so forth. We're coming back to a more holistic view of ourselves in our setting, which is this planet, and that is a religious view.
I can't wait to get to Brian now on this. So originally religion had a good attitude towards the natural world and our place in it, and then along came the Enlightenment and rational thought and kind of trashed that. So now religion might be the way that we can educate our children.
No,
back
now
to
biology is getting back to a less mechanistic
and
view.
in fact, to be fair, the whole Jim Lovelock and his whole Gaia idea, and in fact also lots of the mixing up of disciplines, the bio, geo, atmospheric, putting the different parts together and seeing the Earth as a whole, actually comes back to those earlier ideas about religion.
But in this country where religion doesn't play a large role now, where the ethical dimension is going to come from is a problem. And I agree with you that many of these views of the planet and putting together the disciplines is helpful. But back to the other aspect too, schools. I do think that schools are the place which should be examples of trying to attain sustainable living in the school, and actually not just putting on a switch and a power station a long way away comes on, but actually some ownership of the energy, and a school is the place to start in doing that.
I'd go much further than that, and I would say get the kids out of the school. We are not actually designed to sit at desks inside a cubicle as young kids for 8 hours a day. I think it drives kids crazy.
Yeah. Get them out into the field, but when they're back in their school, I want them to be able to see that energy being generated.
That would be good too, but the public education system has devolved from the 19th century, when what we wanted was little office clerks who could read and write and scratch away like Bob Cratchit. Scratch it.
Now we don't
scratch it.
Comes back to a population. We'd have so many school kids running around though.
Well, I think they should be. In fact, there's a movement in the United States called No Child Left Inside. And there's some other thinking, which is that attention deficit disorder is actually nature deficit disorder. And that young kids are designed really to be in nature, and to have them growing up in apartment blocks and then send them inside to school all the time. It's really very detrimental to their development.
You spent quite a lot of your childhood in nature.
Yes.
I spotted that.
That's why I'm a proponent for it. But and I didn't go to school full time until I was 12. And
look how you turned out.
And look how I turned out. I still have a problem with desks. Desks, standing in line, the boys' door, the girls' door. How weird was that? It was all very weird.
I'd love them to go outside, but I want them to look up as well as down. The sky around there shows you so much of what is going on. And so most people ignore that huge bit and perhaps look down here. So I'll let them look down at the biology here, but I want them to look at the sky as well.
For how long every day?
It's always changing.
So we have to. We can't have rules. They have to be able to look up when they want to and look down when they want to. That's what I say.
Well, if you look up for too long, you get dizzy and fall over. I can tell you this is personal experience.
Then you'll get very close to the ground.
I think that's a lovely idea, and there is something in that. There's surely something in this that one of the things that we've forgotten is our ability to look at the world and wonder. And also, one of the things we've lost is the sense that we actually are a serious part of this. And I don't mean in some... I mean, I'm a nature lover. I have to confess I have a hidden interest here too. And I did grow up grubbing under sheds and looking at bugs and insects and creatures too. And I still do that when nobody's watching. But I do think too that what's important is for us to understand how connected we are, just in terms of the water and the food and the drink and the clothes, and it's very easy for us living in. I live in a city, and it's easy for me to forget where my water comes from. It comes out of a tap, right? And as long as we continue with that disconnect, it's very hard for us to believe in this problem. I believe it in my head, but do I believe it in my heart? And if I don't, who the heck will?
But we do get the water supply cut off for so many hours a day sometimes, or we can't hose our garden.
It's shocking.
And then it starts to come, someone should do something about this.
So if you get the kids early and keep that sense there, that's going to be a much more promising thing for the future, assuming there is a future, right?
Well, one would think so. You'd think that it would work like that. On the other hand, they pick up a lot of stuff from their parents. So if you take them outside and they go, yuck, icky, it's dirty, You know that they have a very polishing kind of parental situation.
So what about these schools? I mean, this is something that has particularly been true in the States, but is starting to happen here as well, which is, first of all, schools that say that they don't want to teach the theory of evolution, now saying that they don't want to teach the theory of climate change.
And why don't they want to?
Because it's only one side of the story.
Why don't they teach both sides?
So to teach both sides of the climate change story, one side of it is that you teach the Bible and the other side of it is that you teach the science.
That's not, the climate change isn't in the Bible. It's got nothing to do with it.
Actually, I wouldn't teach climate change. I would teach the science that underlay the parts of it. And then one implication that people are drawing from this is, and we see these temperatures warming and it's all consistent, but you don't teach climate change as such. You teach the basic science that is behind it and the observations of there, and you say, well, how does all this fit together?
And the ability to ask questions.
Yes, absolutely.
The ability to be a skeptic,
The ability to be a skeptic, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we've got time for one more question, so who's it going to be? I think over here.
Hello. Margaret, I really enjoyed the year of the flood, and I hope you don't mind if I give away a little bit of the book.
Don't give away the ending.
It's quite close to the end, but I don't think it's a big revelation because because it's actually a feature that's common to a lot of apocalyptic literature, namely that the flood is quite sudden, that when the end comes, it's really quick. And that's not the case with climate change, because it'll actually be a really slow and gradual process. And there's some writers like John Gray in the UK and John Greer in the States, for instance, that say that it's easier for us to think about the future either as this kind of steady progress or as a sudden apocalypse, because those are these myths that we have from religion. But I think it might also be that a book about a slow decline might just be awfully dull to write. So I'd be curious to hear why you chose to write such an ending.
Well, first of all, the flood in the year of the flood isn't made of water. That's just this religious cult's name for the catastrophic event that they are anticipating. And what it actually is, and we have the science to do this. We now have the science to make a global pandemic to which nobody's got any resistance. And we also have the means to spread it very quickly. So some people say that the book is apocalyptic, by which they usually mean that everything turns gray. But that isn't what happens in this book at all. It's just the people who are affected. It's not even as bad as West Nile, which killed a lot of corvids and horses. Everything else does fine. In fact, everything else does better. And that is the point of the person who has actually manufactured this virus, which, as I say, we have the ability to do now. And if you think that people in national defense departments aren't busily working away in their labs right now doing those very same things, you're quite wrong. The only problem with it now is that if you let it out, it's going to affect your side as well as the other side. So unless you want to polish off everybody, you're not going to let that out of the box, are you?
What if someone did want to? Oh, I don't want to go there. So, actually, Brian, in the context of climate change, one of the other reasons I think that we haven't acted on it, in spite of all that we've known for so long, is that it doesn't come with one big catastrophic event that can shake everybody up. It's a series of events, none of which can be particularly fingered as this has to be climate change. Do you think that's?
Yeah, this is a real problem. That there's no doubt a few tropical cyclones going through the US, which might have nothing to do with climate change, would shake an awful lot of people, and it would obviously do some real damage, and many lives would be lost. But events like that, unfortunately, seem to be needed to trigger action. I think we're, as I see it, evolving. It will be a question at what point we think, my goodness, this really is, this is bad. What can we do about it? And unfortunately, that could be too late to do too much about it. It's going to get worse than it is at any point when you say, okay, right, we're going to try and stop it. It was going to get worse than that.
I think it's interesting too that, for example, in China, I think there's a much more active sense of we have environmental issues and environmental problems than you might think. And the reason has very little to do with carbon dioxide and climate change, and a lot to do with the fact that if you're in Beijing, you can't breathe because of the smog, and the river is an open sewer, and there's chemical pollution in the water.
But the other aspect in China is the drought that there's been in the Beijing, the Yellow River area, and the floods in the Yangtze. And the question is that sort of thing going to be exacerbated? So they're aware of their water supply as well. They have both.
But my point there was just that it can be something that has nothing to do with the actual problem that can trigger people to act on the problem itself.
Yeah, no, that's right. So it really is just how much do we need as a warning?
Yeah. So, well, we've talked about warnings, and we've talked about catastrophe and cataclysm and apocalypse and the fundamentally flawed nature of humans. So I hope everyone's feeling very cheerful right now. I'm not sure that I am.
We should say a few good words. We are very inventive. We're very creative. We're very inventive. We are capable of problem solving if we know what the problem is. So I'm saying a few good words for the human race here. But to people who say to me, well, looking 30 years down the road, I say, actually, that's not going to be my problem.
Brian, do you feel optimistic?
It'll be your problem.
Yeah, I have to be optimistic. I'm an optimist, so I'm going to be optimistic. We have the ozone hole was a problem. We saw what the problem was, and we found the solutions. Now, DuPont and ICI made money out of these solutions, but those have been put into place, and that ozone hole is on the process of going out. That was the very easy one. But we did tackle that one. I have to be optimistic. I think it is that the green technologies give me the optimism that there really will be once those are developed more, we will see the advantages of that. And that people will see in a country like the UK, where we're definitely going in that direction, hey, this is actually rather better than what was before. And it could really snowball, if I can use snowball in this global warming. It could snowball at that time, and I have to be optimistic. We're going to do it.
Okay, and so do you think, Margaret, you're ever going to write a utopia instead of a dystopia?
Utopias were very 19th century.
Dystopias for the 21st century. On that fine note, I'm going to say thank you to both of our participants and to all of you for listening. Thanks very much. So I'm going to hand over now to Anne Chisholm, who's from the Royal Society of Literature, who's going to close for us.
Yes, as Chair of the Royal Society of Literature, it's fallen to me to thank everyone concerned with this remarkable evening. It really has been exceptional, both in the distinction of the speakers and the urgency, indeed the vital importance of the topic that's been discussed. We at the Royal Society of Literature greatly value our links with the Royal Society, which do enable us, once or twice a year, to bring together writers of real distinction and scientists of real distinction. And our speakers this evening have shown how fruitful that can be. So before I thank them, I want to thank everybody at the Royal Society and everyone at the Royal Society of Literature who's helped make this evening possible. I particularly want to mention Zandra Bingley, whose idea it was that the Royal Society of Literature could lure Margaret Atwood to speak for us, which we've been trying to do by pairing her with a scientist who would interest her. And we managed that. And I'd also like to thank Barbara Hayes of the Authors Licensing Collecting Society, whose generosity helps make this and some of our other evenings possible. But most importantly of all, of course, I want to thank our speakers, and first of all, the Chair, Gabrielle Walker, who I think you'll all agree brought an extraordinary amount of knowledge and skill to chairing this evening. Her contribution was tremendous. Thank you. And then Sir Brian Hoskins, who represented science with great patience and good humour, stuck to his guns. He needs evidence, and that is as vital in this debate as anything else. So thank you for hearing me. And, of course, to Margaret Atwood, who has demonstrated that a great writer doesn't live in a literary bubble, that a writer can talk to scientists on equal terms without in the least compromising the fact that what writers bring to this debate, as to many others, is the imaginative dimension, without which none of these issues could be communicated. None of us who are not scientists would understand what it's all about, and that's a vital task. So thank you to Margaret.